Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the public lecture co-hosted by NUS Cities and IES. Before we start the event, please ensure your devices are on silent or powered off. Thank you. For those who don't know about NUS Cities, we are a university-wide, multidisciplinary, open and inclusive collaborative platform hosted within the College of Design and Engineering, otherwise known as CDE. Through our collaborations with local and international institutions, we hope to create synergies that extend within as well as beyond NUS. The NUS Cities Public Lecture Series will investigate policies, ideas, and projects developed by urban experts which aspire to create sustainable, resilient, and livable cities. Through the lecture series, we hope to create a platform for discussion, retrospection, and conversation to give momentum to the ongoing research and exploration regarding issues concerning cities. The Institute for Environmental and Sustainability, otherwise known as IES, at the National University of Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, seeks to become the world's leading global sustainability policy think tank for Southeast Asia in particular, and in Asia in general. IES is dedicated to accelerating knowledge generation and dissemination critical for achieving sustainability goals championed by governments, the private sector, and civil society organizations. The Institute accomplishes its fit-for-purpose mission through its scientifically tested triangular approach, which includes applied and cross-cutting research, knowledge network training programs, and policy dialogues aimed at enhancing policy design capacity building. I would now like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Mr. Henk Ovink. Mr. Ovink is the Executive Director and Founding Commissioner for the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. He was the first ever Global Water Ambassador, appointed in 2015 by the Dutch Cabinet as the Special Envoy for International Water Affairs. In his capacity, he led the second UN Water Conference in 2023, the first since 1977. Mr. Ovink served on President Obama's Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force, where he led the long-term innovation, resilience, and rebuilding efforts, and developed and led the groundbreaking Rebuild by Design competition. Before joining the task force, Mr. Ovink was both Acting Director General of Spatial Planning and Water Affairs, as well as the Director for National Spatial Planning for the Netherlands, after multiple roles in the private sector as well as in the academia. Mr. Henk holds an honorary doctorate at the Delft University. So I'm sorry, I should have called you Dr. Henk. In 2023, Dr. Ovink was the 10th recipient of the Foreign Affairs Decoration of Honor in Gold for his unique and outstanding water diplomacy work and global leadership. Please join me in welcoming him on stage.
I checked how long I have. Yeah, I think it's on, eh? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Thank you. That is an honor. It's great to see you all here. Luckily, not my first time in Singapore. Been here almost every year except for the pandemic. Sometimes even more often. I was a fellow at CLC twice, which was also an opportunity to stay a bit longer and literally do a deeper dive into Singapore context. And now I have the honor and the pleasure to be here for a week at NUS. Really, again, getting to know Singapore and Singapore challenges and the people, of course, better. For me, it's also, I'm in between jobs, as I say, after being special envoy for 9 years and setting up this Global Commission on the Economics of Water and now leading it as its executive director. We will let our report go out to the world this Thursday. This was not planned, I can tell you. When we planned, Teng Chai and I and others, me coming here, we picked this week as the best in between many international events. And then we changed the dates of delivery for the Global Commission exactly in this week. And President Tharman Shanmugaratnam is one of the 4 co-chairs on the Commission. I'll talk about it a bit. And so we will have now the opportunity to also launch it while I'm here. So I think it's a real opportunity in many ways. I'd like to talk to you about water. That's what I love to do. That's why I checked on the time, because I can talk about water the whole day. And at a certain point, you want to go home or whatever. So let's do that. And I was thinking, how am I what's this technical title going to be? And I think water is personal. It's personal for me. I think it's personal for you in many different ways. And I think it's exactly these different ways that touch upon different values, different needs, different urgencies. If we take a step back, there's a very holistic and comprehensive story to tell on water. And I think that's what amazes me in water. I'm not a hydrologist. I went from mathematics to art, to design, to public policy. So I got a little bit of a weird background. It's a bit of a mix of my mother, who was an activist, school teacher, first female school director post-World War II in the Netherlands. And my father was an architect engineer, a third in a generation. So I'd like to see if we can mix the technical with the personal, and also take questions. When something is unclear or you disagree or agree, it's also possible. Don't worry. The other thing that frames my work are actually many things, but also 3 components in how. Because I love, it's impossible to do something without understanding. The what is key for everything. At the same time, how we do it is as important. Not as a goal, but as a means. But understanding that means really, and deliberations or our conversations, water is such an exemplary tool for that. Because water touches upon everything. It literally presents us the opportunity. Diplomacy is creating that safe space where the difference of voices come together. It's not always diplomacy in the sense of countries and multilateralism. It can be diplomacy in your home, in your neighborhood. It can be diplomacy at your work. The way how we deal with each other. To ask a question before we pose answers, to pause and listen and create literally that safe space. And design, also perhaps as a metaphor, but also as a tool to leapfrog. We feel the challenges of what we've done to our planet every day, being it biodiversity loss, compounding risk coming from water, and of course climate change as an exacerbator of that. And we have to reimagine futures that help us understand that the possibilities that we all can work on can be real, and can be implemented and scaled. So, and sometimes it needs a little bit of guts. And I actually think these days, it needs a lot of courage, from younger generations all the way to more experienced, to really continue to think about the day after tomorrow. Because it's so easy to get stuck in today. The challenges are massive on the individual, community, country, geopolitical level. Wars, conflicts, climate change, impacts, risks only pile up. And before you know it, the only thing we can do is respond. And the moment we're locked into a respond mode, we're literally only looking back. Because you respond to something that happened. And when you respond to something that happened, you turn your back, metaphorically, to the future. Because what happened yesterday or a second ago, anything in between or a week ago. And the measures you come up with in that response are often also baked in the past. Our policies are baked in the past. That's not a blame, but this is how we work. So before you know it, everything we do has that perspective on yesterday. But it takes a little bit of courage to take a perspective on tomorrow. So let's see where we get tonight. For me, it's always also a little bit of a surprise where I will take you. But I start with this. You know this. Why I like it in this time of of all our mobile phones and TikTok and Instagram and whatever, we take these snapshots of life. This was the first snapshot of planet Earth, which, I mean, there were others, but this was like the first one that really brought planet Earth home in full, 1972. Can you imagine? A long time ago. Some of you were there, some of you not. It's also fascinating to understand that they called it the blue marble. There's a reason, because the surface of this planet is covered with water. 71%, debatable, but more or less, 71% of that surface is water. But I take now a big vacuum cleaner and take all the water away. And the weird thing is that it doesn't become a Swiss cheese. There are no holes in this planet because I take all the water away. And that's because it's like a film on the surface of this massive planet. So if I take all the water from oceans, lakes, ice, rivers, groundwater, and put it also in a sphere, it's three-dimensional, the only thing I get is this big one, not even the diameter of the United States. So you can imagine, it looks like a lot, but it's not a lot. But that is then everything. All the water we even can't use. So there are 3 blue dots, and the smallest one is fresh water. And I'm going to fool you because that's a lie, but the smallest one is fresh water. 0.4% of all the water that we can see. Now, part of the water in this world is the water we can't see. That's not even captured in its smallness. But fresh water, key for anything live, is that small. So here you have the idea there's more than enough. Why worry? Here you understand that even without thinking about climate change or economic competitiveness and wars, we have to worry. Now, there is a story to tell beyond the water that we can see. And that has to deal with green water. Now, this is an artist who works on making photographers of rivers. I use it as a reference to get you to a little class. Okay. You know what to do. The yellow is for you. Yeah? Are you ready? Yeah? Okay, here we go. Water on the Earth's surface moves in an unceasing cycle through rivers, oceans, clouds, and rain, called the water or hydrological cycle. And you can all say it together. It's really not a problem. If you all know this, so hydrological cycle. The heat from the sun causes evaporation, very good, of water from oceans and from lakes and wetlands on land. Plants lose water through their leaves by transpiration, very good. Water vapor in the atmosphere condenses to form clouds which are moved around by winds. Rain and snow, collectively known as precipitation, falls from the clouds. Some water that falls on the ground forms, don't worry about this runoff, which collects into streams and rivers, and some seeps, percolates, right, very good, through the soil to become groundwater, which is held in layers of rock called aquifers. Well done. I think you deserve an A+ and a round of applause. Yeah, very good. Yeah. This is important because it shows that beyond water that we can see, there is a massive amount of water that we can't see, the green water. And currently, we're changing the source of fresh water by mismanagement of land, economic development, pollution, over abstraction, and on top of that, climate change. So we assume that there's water and that it's stable and available for everything we want, but that is no longer true. And in the context of increasing demand, economic and population growth, and the diminishing freshwater availability, green and blue, in a hydrological cycle that is destabilizing, we're on a risky path. So this is where we're up against. Now, with the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, the report we will present on Thursday, but you already will see some images from it. we unpack this hydrological cycle in the context of its economic meaning. And we went to a lot of iterations and circles saying the hydrological cycle is characterized by both green and blue water, stocks and flows. And climate change plays a critical role in this. For instance, 1 degree warming means 7% more water vapor increase in the atmosphere. Think about that. Supercharging not only freak events, but supercharging climate change itself. So water, which has been dubbed as the teeth of climate change, it's no longer true. You can't separate water into the adaptation sphere. It is mitigation, it's everything. Water and climate change are linked across the board. You won't find this in the Paris Agreement. We don't find it yet in policy tools to address. But we have to understand the linkages between climate change and the hydrological cycle out of balance. Second, land use change. Look, 60% of water that falls on land comes from green water. Literally, we calculate the average is 45, because not everything falls here on land. But what falls from the skies, 60% comes from green water. Can you imagine if we take away the land where this comes from? Biodiversity loss. So we talk about nature in a totally different context. But it is the, you could say, the assurance or the insurance for a stable hydrological cycle. And with land use management off the charts, deforestation and malpractices in agriculture and energy, we're literally cutting down on that freshwater resource, which is green water. So the link between land use and water has never been so critical right now in the context of this hydrological cycle. And then we have to understand where our water goes and where it comes from. I always find it fascinating that we can literally track now where does our rain come from. And with Potsdam Institute for Climate Change, Johan Rockström and his team, we did research on precipitation sheds and evaporation sheds. So we can literally identify where the rain comes from, a source region, and where it goes, a sink region. So understanding where your water comes from, not only theoretically, but literally identifying precipitation and evaporation sheds. And seeing that these basins around the world, and I picked 4, but I could pick many, show the dependency between land use management, biodiversity, evapotranspiration, and where it rains. And that means we always understood water as something transboundary, a river crossing a border. But with atmospheric river flows, green water flows, crossing oceans, literally connecting continents, we know that this hydrological cycle means that we are connected globally. And it's amazing if you put it on the map. I find it magical, emotional even, that to understand that we can track where our water comes from, but also that it can be the baseline for a conversation. Connections are, often problematic. When you have a border and a dependency, it really depends on the relationship you are able and willing to build up. But the moment you do, you have the opportunity to create a partnership. And partnership is what we need in the context of a world that is more destabilizing. On one hand, you can say water and the hydrological cycle poses another challenge on the geopolitical agenda. But on the other hand, because it's so empowering for food security, energy security, combating climate change, combating biodiversity loss, economic opportunity, economic competitiveness, jobs, health, and so forth, that could be a unifying force. We don't know because we never tried it. Water is not part of any global agreement. We have agreements that are local and regional, but on the UN global level, we never got that far. We tried, but we never got that far. And then last, of course, virtual water. We know we trade water. I don't know what you wear and if it's all fabricated in Singapore, but I guess it's not. And it's not a blame game because mine is actually I bought this suit in Singapore, so it's back home. So I must say I actually did this. I was not aware when I was saying this, but it's actually true. The last time I was here with Singapore Water Week. But trade in food and clothes and, through our connections makes that we create water footprints and water deficits, but also water positives around the world. We're less aware of how this works. And we're also a bit afraid of really putting that into numbers, because the moment you do, before you know it, you get into this blame game. It's a little bit like with this. Do I blame a country for giving me not enough water because their land use policy is off? And the moment you say this, you immediately know that you're in trouble. So transboundary water can be challenging. We like to talk about dams. And yes, they are, but evaporation sheds and can be even increased to that. So that's one. One aspect of water is connected, and why we say the hydrological cycle should be valued and governed as a global common good is that we're all connected. The second is that we find water in every sustainable development goal. And way more than with only blue. If we look at blue and green water, we literally find it in every SDG. And the fact that we find it there is an opportunity to start to achieve those goals. This is not the liability or the risk. This is the value add. So understanding how water works in the context of our 2030 agenda and what we can do about this if we activate that water is going to be key. But there's more than these SDGs. I said there is no agreement on water. That is true. But there are actually many agreements where water plays a key role, this full hydrological cycle. And I just put some on this map saying, in the urban agenda, we know how water plays out on the urban context with disaster risks and the Sendai framework. The UN Water Convention, predominantly blue water, but still, Food System Summit. Not talking about water at all. Nothing, but at the heart, this is about water. Conventional biological diversity, the CBD, the Kunming-Montreal Protocol actually addressed freshwater, but in a very limited way. We celebrated, of course, the agreement, showcasing that multilateralism was still alive. But the fact that the hydrological cycle in itself was not addressed, but only that chunk blue water was taken out. And I could go on, desertification, and of course our climate agreement. Agreements at the UN that promote a hydrological cycle in sync, stabilized, as a security for achieving these goals, these measures, but not amplified. There's no spotlight on that in this agreement. So there is an opportunity to say stabilizing this hydrological cycle is key. So we're connected to it. It comes forward in everything we do. So to sum it up, we can no longer count on water. Green water is critical for the supply of precipitation. Water is a major but unappreciated source of interdependency between countries. Atmospheric rivers, you see what happens upstream, influences the availability of downstream within countries to feedback loops. And interdependencies are complex, but we can see it as a connector. To sum up, the hydrological cycle as a global common good. Now, second part is where we are. And this is where I think it becomes really challenging. Because I'm not sure if you're familiar with the planetary boundaries, but you all not. And a planetary boundary tells you something. The words already, a planetary boundary. It feels immediately like the moment you cross it, something is really wrong. And something is really wrong. Because we're crossing these boundaries. And these are the boundaries that are crossed. 9 assessed, 6 crossed. With the Earth Commission that was chaired by Johan Rockström and Jujita Gupta, and Johan continues and Jujita takes a different role, we added a different perspective. Because planetary boundary is really about our systems, the capability, you could say, the redundancy, the resiliency, and the sustainability of our systems. But what about us humans in these systems? We're not equal. And definitely we're not equally prepared. We have more vulnerable and less vulnerable in our world. Communities at the forefront of biodiversity loss, climate change impacts, wars, and risks compounding. So thinking not only about planetary boundaries, but about just planetary boundaries. The difference between does our planet collapse or do societies collapse is a totally different question. And we know we will lose billions of people before our planet collapses. And those will probably not be us, but the ones that are most vulnerable. So the Earth Commission just presented their last report in Lancet Planetary Health report. It was just released, and where they showcase how Earth system boundaries that are just and safe, how that actually works. And it's relevant to understand that when you cross a boundary, planetary boundary, you already lost the people. So thinking about how we are not only getting into a safe space for our planet, but a safe place for our people is going to be key. Joeita Gupta describes the many aspects of justice. She also does this for the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. And this new justice framework will be presented on Thursday. So I won't go into that too much. But since the Earth Commission's report just came out 2 weeks ago, or 3, I like the idea that I always am happy to hear that scientists are still hopeful. When they talk about just transitions, and Joeita is like a powerhouse of activism in the academic world, that she presents with her team still the opportunity to present to an Earth system boundary that is safe and just. That there is a corridor to imagine and to plan for and deliver where safety and justice still go hand in hand. And I think the fact that we can still look at those future scenarios as opportunities and really take a holistic approach to make them a reality is going to be key. So read the report. Now, the impacts of all this, yeah, you only have to open a newspaper. I live in New York, so I don't open a newspaper anymore because the first 10 pages are about Trump and Harris. So you get a little bit worried. And then the next is about all the wars. It's hard to find the environment, climate, biodiversity loss, let alone water. I remember when I led the UN 2023 Water Conference, I reached out to the New York Times, and we were able to present water stories almost every week. A group of journalists really embarked on a water mission. Of course, that is, slowing down a bit because of the other challenges. But we have to think, we have to understand also not only where it comes from, but also how it impacts our society and how different that is. When I became water envoy, I set up a research called the Geography of Future Water Challenges with a collective of research institute, really literally plotting on the map of the world, the geography, these challenges of water. So, and here you can say, and this is from the first report, the impact of too much water. You could, say every country has a flood or more, predominantly. But this is where you all of a sudden see that the impact of these floods are unequally divided around the world. And the same goes for drought. So they make it distinct and cause migration patterns that in the end will be felt in different places, but not come from where they, and not felt where they come from. Second is, of course, the combination of urbanization and water challenges. We invest and live in these urban places. So it is logical, you can expect that water risks and challenges pile up in the places where we live, go to and invest our Singapore or other dollars in. So understanding the relationship with how we build in the context again of the vulnerability of that future is going to be key. It also shows, and I think this is how we are as humans. There's this saying that we love to live on the edge of the volcano. We urbanize faster in the most vulnerable places of the planet. On our coast, on a riverine context, where land is sinking, where storms are compounding, where droughts and rain are together. This is where we put our money. This is where we bring our families. This is where we want to raise our kids. This is where we want to have a job. So we find the riskier places around the world to live. All the study by the World Bank shows that in the context of what we've invested in these urbanized contexts, there's billions and billions of dollars at risk, looking only at sea level rise, storm surges, etc. So not even taking into account the newer understanding of droughts, of a hydrological cycle out of balance. And I always find it scary and fascinating that because of urbanization growth here in Asia, the former urbanization growth in the US, and this crazy country in Europe, the Netherlands, we find ourselves in the same scheme of land. So, and the Netherlands is here because we invested the majority of our guilders or euros into the place that is literally below sea level. And you could say this is like the risk when it comes to land disappearance, floods, and disaster. But think about drought. World Bank study showed that while a flood has an immediate impact on your economy, because you lose it now, a drought has a longer-term impact on your GDP. And you lose percentage-wise. With the Global Commission on the Economic on Water, we show that the hydrological cycle out of balance actually has a GDP impact on the global north in the next decade of 8%, and in the global south of 15%. So it's way worse than we expected. And then inequality. We talked about the just transitions. In cities, we see this way more than anywhere else, where people in the outskirts, in the slums, in the favelas, live in the most vulnerable place. They have no water access. Health issues are only increasing. And the fact that they're not connected to these networks makes them more vulnerable. Second, they live on land that is the most vulnerable in these urbanized contexts. So, and then health, dirty water. Children die because of that. That is terrible. I'm not saying it's more terrible, but what is so devastating about dirty water is that when you're very young, like a little baby, and you're exposed to contaminated water, it affects your growth. And it not only affects your growth physically, but also mentally. And once that happens, there's no way back. It's not that when you're 5 years or 10 years that you can swallow a pill or go to a doctor and say, hey, can I get my growth back? There's no way you can get that back. So health in the context of water, one of our 5 missions of the Global Commission, is going to be key. And then last, but not least, biodiversity. We talked about this in the context of green water, but biodiversity loss is caused by water pollution and abstraction. And on top of that, bad land use management. While biodiversity is key for regulating that hydrological cycle and playing a critical role in climate mitigation, carbon sinks and stores, as well as adaptation, redundancy and resiliency measures. So losing biodiversity might be the dumbest thing we can do as humans, because this is our guarantee for a future that is safe, just, and sustainable. Having worked around the world, you know the pleasure of when there is water. It literally is a celebration of life. When kids fetch water, not because they have to walk for hours. When women and girls are not raped or murdered on their way to getting water, where girls are no longer monthly dropouts because there are no sanitation facilities in their schools and they can't go to school. But when there's water, sanitation and hygiene, you celebrate life. So with the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, we talk about the hydrological cycle. It's not that we don't want to acknowledge all aspects of it. It's not that we only want to talk about land use and biodiversity. It also is about wash and health and human health and dignity and ensuring that SDG 6 gets delivered. And having worked literally in Afghanistan and in other very fragile and vulnerable contexts, it's always magical to see what water does. It brings communities together. It ensures lives and livelihoods for so many. So at the same time, we know that these images, this is 20, I could have gone back more, but I can come up with a slide like this. You're bored with this. We are all, right? There's a disaster every day. There's a flood, there's a drought, there's a wildfire caused by drought. Man-made disasters. Some people say, when do we wake up? When is the disaster that really triggers us all, global leaders, investors, private sectors, politicians, academics, communities, NGOs to say, now is enough. But it seems that we are having this massive snooze button on the side or on our desk. And everything a disaster happens, we just either just switch the page or drop on this button. I don't know. And so every time you think Pakistan or Libya or now Central Europe, floods here in Asia, in Africa, droughts linked to insecurity, this will be the game changer. This will be your wake-up call. I'm either disappointed or more or less paralyzed. Try to not become cynical in the context of all these disasters. And water helps me out. Not because a bunch of male engineers will come up with a solution. Of course, this is outdated and definitely the wrong kind of people. But because there is the opportunity for a different approach. And I'm often inspired by Secretary General Guterres, but in the midst of the pandemic, he again said, this is a time for science and solidarity. And what he meant, having talked to him, was, it is about really understanding what's at stake. Getting the facts on the table, not denying them, in the context of sustainability, climate, health. And second, it is literally about solidarity of a next level. And this goes this is within your friends and families and communities, within your country, but also across borders. Really figuring out how multilateralism can be reinvented in the context of the challenges we face. It's a long time ago that he said it. The current situation of the UN doesn't really prove him right. Multilateralism is contested in the context of our wars. And at the same time, we know, I know at least in the heart, there is no alternative. Working together locally, nationally, regionally, and globally, across sectors, across silos, is going to be critical importance to be able to do that. But for that, we need a little bit of a perspective, right? As I said in the beginning, responding to what goes wrong might not be our best inspiration. So we need to look ahead. And the UN helps in many fronts, but IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change, comes up with all these reports. Again, probably you haven't read them all, or perhaps some of you have, but let's say in 2018, because this was 2019, in 2018, they came up with a 1.5 degree report. That was the report that showed the differences between 2 and 1.5 degree of critical import. The year after, they presented the cryosphere report, really talking about sea level rise. So those two reports really got all the attention. But the one in the middle, climate change and land, is key. It's your handbook of designers and planners, because it shows how our global investments, our economies, are actually predominantly, 99%, increasing climate change, and at the same time, increasing our vulnerability. Of course, there's hope in that report, because it's not everything. And in the parts where there is an opportunity, there is the opportunity to change course. But we have to face this challenge that this way of how our economies work, the way we validate and evaluate our infrastructure, is aimed for stupidity. We love our short-term single-focus projects that create more negative externalities or more risks than a holistic long-term approach. So the mix between a future where everything is increasing and solutions that are short-term, single-focused, and create a value add, a profit on that short term, is going to be challenging. We have to escape our silos a bit. We have to figure out how such a SDG agenda can really present us with a comprehensive perspective of the future, and that you can't carve out one of those SDGs, say, oh, I'll do 6, you do 7, I do 8, you do 10, he does 14. No, it's one agenda, and they all belong together. And this holistic vision of the future has to be, this mission of this better future has to be organized in also a very comprehensive, inclusive manner. We had a Paris Agreement, a biodiversity agreement, a Dubai COP, but we have to figure out how to overcome a stupidity, because it's like the past practices we just push forward. It's this reactivism that what we have in place won't deliver us on the SDGs. There's, we can't move from yesterday to today to tomorrow and achieve them. We have to re-envision that future. So thinking about that long term, in scenarios, in planning, and by design, by innovation, collaboration, is going to be key in the context of moving away from those reactive approaches that really make us more vulnerable. In other words, business as usual is not only not enough, it is lethal. And we don't want that lethal capacity in front of us. We want to make sure that what we do now is a step in the context of a better future. That what we develop and design and implement now can be scaled and replicated to ensure that we deliver on that mission and vision. And that instead of moving from crisis to crisis in this very non-responsive manner, or being super reactive and incrementally creep ourselves to the future, we become radically proactive. Radically proactive in embracing a future holistically, comprehensively, and with all and by all, to ensure that the solutions we put on the table are an alternative, and that they prove wrong the stupidity of single-focused investment, that they prove wrong non-responsiveness or reactivism, that they prove wrong that creating something safe for today while creating something unsafe for tomorrow is not okay. That maladaptation with a chic word or band-aids might give a little bit of relief, but actually can be a next step towards the next disaster. And water helps. It's a continuous line in my story. Water helps. It's connecting the SDGs, it's connecting our networks, but we have to understand it. We have to value it and start to manage it accordingly. And for that, we need to look in this combination of long-term planning in a very comprehensive manner, looking at that future and connecting it with short-term innovative projects. Doing that inclusively and in collaboration and in partnerships, and at the same time, transparent. Transparent for accountability, transparent for learning, transparent for building capacity. Capacity that is individual, for everyone, that is institutional, public, private, NGO, but it is also informal in these partnerships, partnerships that we need to build that better future. And I think design and innovation can help, because they present us with futures that we can imagine. with a design approach, we can say that what needs to be done can also be done, that there is hope in imagining those futures. Design is solution-oriented. It really focuses on the opportunities to build. It has the capacity to connect, to look across sectors, scales, silos. But I think most importantly, in the context of decision makings that are off, design has the opportunity to be ambitious, to aspire a future that we all want. So with such a design approach also comes the question on how to get this done. How do we build these type of solutions? And that is a little bit of a detour always. You need time to invest in each other. You need time to understand. We need time to literally comprehend what is necessary. We need time to work together, to be able to say, hey, this is at stake. These are the facts. These are the partnerships. These are the opportunities, and not immediately jump to conclusion. And for that, in a world where interests are competing, where alignment is not easy to find, where we are still looking for those quick fixes and easy solutions, we need to build literally safe spaces. Spaces where we can come together. Programs and processes where we overcome our differences, where we build trust, where a collaboration is literally a collaboration and not a zero-sum game, where negotiations are a little bit left out of the room, but where it really is, what can I bring? Where is the added value of my expertise, of my opportunities in this combination? And knowing that we're in a constant post-disaster context, there's always momentum. There is never an excuse to not try. So I'll talk a little bit about my work in the context of a massive disaster, and that was Hurricane Sandy in the US, now 12 years ago, almost, October 29, and this was the result. A disaster that hit New York City front and center. We then had a different president. Well, let's not talk about that too much. But yeah, that happens. So Sandy created a massive disaster in the New York context. President Obama, when he started his presidency 4 years before, 3.5 years, or almost 4 years before Sandy hit, he said, I think in February of that year, no Katrina on my watch. And Hurricane Katrina is still the most costly, most deadliest disaster in the US history. But it also happened under a presidency where President Bush had no clue what to do. And I don't know if you remember, but he was nowhere to find, nowhere near. And when it was too late, they flew him over in a helicopter and he was not able to touch the ground. So the disconnect, that image of President Bush sitting in a helicopter, flying over a disaster-prone region where everything went wrong, you could say, post-disaster, not only through the disaster, but also post-disaster, couldn't have been a better picture of defaulting government. And Obama said, I want to know what we're up against. So he asked 2 of his ministers, his secretaries, Napolitano and Donovan, to come up with a new national disaster response framework to be ready when things go wrong. Make sure that we know what to do. So when Sandy happened, a week before his re-election, he put together a presidential task force. A task force that combined 23 federal agencies in one collaborative effort, and that worked together with states, local, and tribal communities in a collaborative manner, bringing in private sector, NGOs, and others to really get aid on the ground, first and foremost, get the money ready through Congress in a bipartisan effort, but also start to help reimagine what we could do. A task force for rebuilding and repair and relief, but also a task force for reimagination. I joined the task force for the infrastructure and the resiliency work, but also for the reimagination. To think about what is it that we could do to use a disaster as something of a stepping stone towards a better future. And you have to be careful here how that works, but I'll get to that. So I developed a concept called rebuild by design, using the process of rethinking what went wrong, also again as this sidestep, taking a little bit of a step aside, said, let's not immediately plan for what's next, but let's work together with the communities, with the planners, with the governments, from all sides. Let's bring in expertise from around the world and rethink what went wrong, because these disasters are like X-rays. They literally tell us on a systems level, interdependencies, vulnerabilities, but also opportunities. And if we take that step back collectively, understand systemically, then we can identify opportunities on how to move ahead. Sandy research showed exactly this relationship between social and physical vulnerability. The red is where more vulnerable communities live. The blue is where the water went. I can show you here, close to Jersey City. This is where they stored Agent Orange at the time of Hurricane Sandy. This is where the water, 6 meters high, flowed through industrial site. This is also where social housing sits. This is where the Environmental Protection Agency had to close the playgrounds because, in the words of one of the neighbors, the soil lit up at night, so contaminated it was. This is where people cleaned their basements with buckets. This is where a natural disaster, a climate disaster, a man-made climate disaster became an environmental, but also a justice disaster. So understanding these dependencies is key if we want to reimagine a future. Second, more on the infrastructure side. 75% of the power supply was in the floodplain, 80% of fuel storage in the floodplain. On the Lower East Side of Manhattan, so this is Manhattan, this is the Lower East Side, this is called Hospital Row. It's literally a row of hospitals. Sandy banged those hospitals. So the water flowed in, the doors were not protected. Turns out they had emergency generators on the roof. I visited with Secretary Napolitano and Sean Donovan. I think, good idea. But there was a law, New York State law, that says you're only allowed to store fuel above the ground if you're a gas station. So the fuel for the generators was in the basement. The doctors had to carry with buckets fuel up the stairs to keep the machines of the heart patients running before they got evacuated. So we don't think about, when you draft a law on storing fuel, that a disaster might happen to actually impact a hospital on Hospital Row where the generator is actually positioned. You don't imagine it. These links are not... No?
They did not have pumps?
No, there was no electricity. Yeah, exactly. If there was electricity, they wouldn't have needed the generator. The generator was needed for the medical, was only for the medical apparatus. The elevators didn't work. Nothing did work. No, that's what I'm saying. The connections between these policies are not made in the context of disaster. And all of a sudden they're exposed. Now, when Sandy would hit another, it won't happen because they put all these measures in place because they had the experience. But until that, nobody had told them. So it's interesting. While disasters are devastating, they present us not only with an opportunity, but a responsibility to change. Not build back, but to rethink what we have put in place. And this is a simple, simple part, but we, on the scale of infrastructures, we're here. Energy. One power plant went out. Half of Manhattan out of power. So one power plant out, bang. This is not only that there are no lights. That means that in these high rises, where often more vulnerable people live, people that are not able to walk 30 floors up and down to get food and water are left alone in these buildings. And of course, the rich and famous were safe because they had their own generators. They took care of themselves. Wall Street was fine, of course, but the rest of Manhattan, out. So the redundancy, resiliency, and sustainability of these systems are also not thought through. Again, thinking about just transitions, the justice of this was not a key factor here. The most vulnerable were the worst protected. So this is how it works. around the world. And then the governance. I taught at Harvard Graduate School of Design, and I asked my students to also do an assessment on the whole governance system. And it turns out it's a mess. We have voluntary mayors on the Jersey Shore that literally have a job next to being a mayor. So there are no mayors on Long Island. There's one big shot mayor in New York City. So, and then Connecticut, the mayor has a different position than in any of the other states. So imagine if you're coming in with one type of rebuilding strategy, on a governance level, it's a mess. And then there's an implementation agency, the Port Authority. There was an article at that time said port authorities could save the planet. Well, not the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, because it's a political machine. The governors of New York and New Jersey and the mayor of New York hijack that implementation machine. So in that context, President Obama set up Hurricane Sandy Task Force, because he said it has to be about the people. It has to be about, one, getting relief done on time, and second, thinking about the future. And the only way to do that is working together, cutting across silos, making those connections, and work together. And it doesn't matter. Christie, Cuomo, de Blasio, Bloomberg, we will work together, because it's about reimagining that future now, because that is our responsibility. We got 60 billion from Congress. Now I put this up. And there's a reason, because I touched upon this a bit. I said disaster is an opportunity, and a disaster is a responsibility. But never forget that the disaster is also a disaster. A disaster kills. You lose literally family, friends, your house, everything you saved for. You might not have the right insurance. You lose your daughter. And then when a president or a Dutchman comes in and says, hey, let's think about the future, it won't go well. If everything you lost is there, the only thing you want is to go back. So next to seeing this as a responsibility and as an opportunity, you have to also think about the human factor. If you are not able to understand these emotions and bring together people that literally lost everything, don't trust the government, and definitely don't want to talk and think about the future, and you put them aside, you lose it. So investing in the people perhaps is the most important part in the context of this post-disaster work. Because if you can bring them along, when we brought my team, when we tried to bring our team to Staten Island, we got mail saying we're going to shoot you off the island. So we had to protect the team. But we went, and we went back and back and back, all the way until we built a relationship with the community. A relationship that is still strong today, where the projects we implemented finished 2 weeks ago, just got funding 2 weeks ago to be scaled 4 times, thanks to the community, but not at first. On the Lower East Side, Damaris Reyes, who runs all the community organizations, said, Rebuild by Design made us sit on the same side of the table. And that was a compliment. But then she said, we can easily sit back on the other side again, because it's very vulnerable. In the Netherlands, there's a saying, trust comes by turtle, but leaves by horse. And that's what it is. It's step by step, investing in each other, but never let go. And I think this reminded me, when we saw this near the New Jersey shore, that in the context of a disaster, there's fear and anger and grief that is real. Understanding that fear, anger, and grief is key also in developing solutions together. And that's what we did. So I set up Rebuild by Design. It was a challenge. It was like a competition, not against one another, but against the best measures, like the highest ambition, who could outperform each other. And we asked for teams from around the world that work were brought together with community organizations, engineers and designers, scientists, social and physical and environmental, that were able to work with politicians and businesses, Republicans and Democrats. And we got 148 applications and we selected 10 teams. I raised philanthropic dollars to ensure that that process was guaranteed. And we brought these teams to the region. And they worked in the soup kitchen on the Jersey Shore. You had people crying on their shoulders. They talked to Governor Christie and Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio to understand the political. These teams were exposed to a society they'd never seen before. And they started to work together too. So we had 10 teams of different agencies, organizations, and across, working together in a collective effort to first understand research, getting your facts right, Secretary General Guterres, your science right, really understand, don't jump to conclusions. Understand what went wrong, what are the vulnerabilities, what are the interdependencies, and therefore what are the opportunities, and then build coalitions. First partnerships, then solutions, because those communities help you inform what to imagine. Don't design for, but with. Don't think about, but think with. Really sit together and listen, ask questions, and more and more and more and more. And they imagined a future of that region through 10 projects. We had 40 plus, we selected 10, we found the money. And right now, these projects are being implemented. So I go through them fast. So this is Manhattan, Central Park. This is the Agent Orange place. This is the Meadowlands. The Meadowlands is totally polluted, context. It's your sponge city, but then without its sponge capacity because of all the pollution, industrialization. The team reimagined the Meadowlands indeed as this massive sponge to capture surge and stormwater, but also help clean it, create an environment that is key, but also a barrier to protect the surrounding, and a barrier that also is the carrier of a BRT system to ensure that the communities are connected. The second team worked on the Long Island Bay, a bay where only perpendicular rivers are. And they literally took the concept of room for the river at scale. Every perpendicular stream became room for the river approach, capturing that water, increasing storage capacity, and ensuring that flooding became an asset actually for an environment, for the opportunity to create public space. Third team worked on Manhattan. And they said, we have to think about protecting Manhattan, because this is where all the water went during Sandy. And imagine this protection as a community by community scheme, because one community needs something else than another. So right now, as you can see, the park that is being developed here is under implementation. And it will be the park that will protect social housing on the Lower East Side. There's this massive piece of infrastructure, the FDR, in between. So they're building bridges to connect the community literally with the park to ensure that the park is the protection against the floods, but is also accessible. Hoboken, I wish I had a up-to-date picture in it. Hoboken is here on this side of the Hudson, so it's across. It is an island, a former island with a polder in the back. So you can imagine when the surge came in, there was only water. The mayor always complained at that time that her husband didn't take the car away. So, forget it. That was it. The team said, we have to do more than only protect, because it can also rain and heat island effect. So we have to make sure that we resist the water, but when it comes in, that we can delay it, we can store it, and then discharge it. This holistic approach was put in place with the community. Not easy. There was a lot of people who resisted. But a year ago, a little less than a year ago, we had this massive rain event in New York. My street was flooded, Manhattan was flooded. Hoboken was not flooded. The New York Times wrote this article saying, "What did not happen in Hoboken?" was the title. And They put all these measures in place. So they were able, with this massive rain event that flooded Manhattan and Brooklyn, they were safe. They were able to create storage capacity with public parks, underground, with parking garages to really ensure that it's more than only about protection measures. Hunts Point Food Market is the place where all the food goes through before it reaches Manhattan. If it's out of service, within 1.5 days, the whole of Manhattan is out of food. It's in the floodplain, unprotected. It's also the place, you can imagine, all these trucks driving in and out, where a low-income community lives, with the highest, this zip code has the highest asthma rate of the whole US. So kids are unsafe. So this was not about protecting a peninsula for flooding. No, this was about creating community capacity, ensuring that with the food market and the truckers and the unions and the community, because for the community it's also their livelihood, this is where they earn their living, that you create not only a safer environment, but also a healthier environment. And then off the coast, that's the one I just talked about. We created barrier islands, eco reefs, where oysters and fish and sea lions and eagles now find their new habitat, where water quality is going up. The islands are being implemented. These are real pictures already from 2 years ago. And the governor 2 weeks ago just announced that we're going to replicate it ×3 off the coast of Staten Island because it works. Way cheaper than gray infrastructure. It holds the storms at bay, protects the coast, creates an environment for kids to play and swim in the water that is safe, water quality that is going up. So ticking all these holistic boxes, but never fitting any validation scheme. So we could only test one part. Literally, the decision was made, you can do this part of the coast, and the rest is done by, our old out-fashioned engineering. But we proved them wrong because it works. So now we can replicate it across the whole coast of Staten Island. I always like it when things work. Then, after, we started Rebuild by Design in 2013. The plans were ready in 2014, agreed upon in 2015. Within 10 years, these projects are being implemented. These are billion-dollar projects. It's nice, it works. So literally to that 1% of the climate change and land report, there are 1% being implemented. We awarded the first billion to these projects. We created a national disaster resiliency competition on the back of it, really looking at all the states that were impacted. Now, I have to check the time, because I don't know. What is it? What am I doing? Yeah, how long are you going to stay here? Yeah. People are leaving already, yeah. Shall I do one more and then stop? Yeah, can you hold on a bit? Yeah, is it okay? Yeah, okay. So, because I talked about like the whole complexity in our report. I talked about the importance of water. Of course, it's always great to talk about the things that we do, and then post-disaster is one, but second is pre-disaster. And this is also a little bit here, in your region. I set up a program, and the program was called Water as Leverage, really using water as a lever for sustainability, resiliency, and equity, and focusing on cities in Asia. We did research. Part of all this research is that you really start to understand all these relationships. And looking at, being here in Singapore, working together with so many amazing partners, we looked at Southeast Asia, of course, and said, whoa, if we think about compounding challenges when it comes to water, here is the place. So we listed them all, from floods, from rivers, seas, typhoons, landslides, in river basins, urbanizing land rivers, urbanizing deltas, sinking lands, and looking at drought, salinity, salt intrusion, sea level rise, subsidence, wet bulb temperatures, and water pollution. You see places where they all stack up. And of course, these are cities. This is exactly what we know. We build in the most challenging places, but also because we build there, land starts to sink. Pollution becomes, apparent. And this confluence of challenges only increases. So it's not a surprise. Again, all my projects are about fundraising because you need to ensure that these projects work. So I was able to fundraise for 3 cities. And we worked in Chennai, India, Khulna in Bangladesh, small town, well, 500,000, and Semarang in Indonesia. And again, taking this approach where we carved out time and space to create the opportunity to find each other. To find each other in the understanding of the challenges, to find each other in the different interests that come in play, to find each other in what are the opportunities, and then develop them together, and then bring them back into the policy space and say, hey, we have an alternative. Can never come out of the existing. We have to create time and space for that. But if we do, that alternative can really not only tick those boxes, but can be implemented and scaled and presented. So we worked on the ground in all these communities, again, brought experts from around the world in Khulna, Bangladesh, Chennai, India, and Semarang, Indonesia, and worked with the communities to understand what was wrong and right. We had 6 teams working in these 3 cities. I'll get to this. I'll explain one. This is Chennai. So Chennai sits on the east coast of the India peninsula. So this is the coastline, and this is the border of the city of Chennai in Tamil Nadu. It's a city with predominantly urban surface water flows. And they look a little bit like this. So all this water comes in through these surface water flows. And in the past, when Chennai was a small town, people would just build a little, not like a dam, but like a little wall to hold the water a bit. It stayed. You could use it for drinking, washing, cooking, industry, agriculture. It would seep back into, percolate back into the ground for the aquifer. It was a very stable situation. But with increasing industrialization, urbanization, and economic growth, of course, what happened was that all that water in the city became polluted. Chennai, a city of 8 million, 9 million people, with no water strategy on how to deal with that. No way to have infrastructure in place for sewage, for wastewater treatment. Of course, became quite a mess when it comes to water quality and availability. So there is a lot of water coming in. Then the monsoon brings in also a lot of water. And we know climate change now makes monsoons more extreme, but the period of rainfall is also shorter. So you have a very long period of none, and then all of a sudden way too many. But on the scale of a 12-month period, there's still a lot of water falling. But as Chennai ate up all its natural space, its wetlands, its swamps, its streams, the water that falls immediately becomes polluted and flows back into the ocean. So you have an aquifer that is depleted because of overuse and pollution. Then, because of a loss of pressure, it's becoming also more saline. There's a city that's expanding and growing, so water demand is off the charts. And while you could say there's enough water coming in from all these parts, there's not enough water to deal with this. So it's a totally disbalancing situation. Knowing that water is demanding, the government builds desalination plants. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against desalination, although I find it challenging, especially old desalination infrastructure, where water is heated up at a massive cost of investment and energy, and the brine, the leftover, is actually flowing back into the ocean, creating underwater graveyards. I don't think that is a good idea. There are places around the world that need desalination, and luckily with new innovations, a lot of good is happening. But desalination in the context when there is enough water, but where it's only about reuse, recycling, sustainable use of water, not in place, that is stupidity at a cost, because these plants are costly. And what does Chennai need to do? They borrow money from development banks or development partners. so the debt of the city is going up at the cost for its citizens, to build infrastructure that is actually a band-aid in the context of an opportunity of mending, in this case, on the scale of a city, a hydrological cycle. So this is where infrastructure failure, infrastructure investment becomes a failure and a liability for on many fronts. The good news is that if you were able to skip where we are and go back to capturing that water, nature-based, cleaning it, literally a nature-based solution, recharging your aquifer, then you could have a stable water situation in the city of Tianjin, because there's more than enough water, but the system is out of sync. Now, this is what they tried to do. And the slides are a little bit wrong. So the team, whose team, went through this rigorous research of looking back on how all this water worked, how actually all the infrastructure was externalized, what the water demand was, and how it could decrease if you actually would stabilize that water system, what the costs were for society with an alternative, and also how a carbon footprint could be limited just because a different approach. The different approach looks like this. Nature-based solutions that work on flood prevention, drought prevention, sanitation, and an improved urban environment by restoring historic, these are these tanks. So normally were these walls became tanks, a temple next to it, religious places. It's like an upside down pyramid. It takes the water, and in the middle, it brings it back to the aquifer. It's a supernatural system, but it's also a celebration of water. So it literally pays tribute to that single source that we all need. Of course, now dysfunctional and polluted, I'm not going to show those, but they are still there. Using the historic tanks and restoring them, but also creating new, focusing on forestry and wetlands and canal restoration and bioswales, but also looking at your recycling of waste and wastewater, creating opportunities across the city. And we implemented one. Now, we went across the city figuring out where can we do this. And we worked together with the school for the deaf and blind. And school is in a neighborhood. So this is the school, and it sits in a neighborhood. And it captures now all the rainwater, but also the sewage water, and treats it on site. So these are wastewater. This is a wastewater treatment plant in a schoolyard. So this is a wastewater treatment plant in a schoolyard. And it creates with bacteria, and then through fabricated wetlands, the water on site. It monitors everything. The teachers and the kids on their phones can literally see where the water goes, what the quality is, how much goes to the aquifer at what time. And when the rain event happened, this neighborhood did not flood. So it worked. This was unfundable upfront because it did not fit in the boxes of infrastructure spending. Because it's what ticking boxes of water quality, health, environment, heat island, school, a community. Our MDBs we worked with said way too complex. Implement it, and then it's proven technology. So now they all come running and say, hey, can we scale this and replicate it? Because the costs are a third or less of implementation, but only half on maintenance and operation. So you present an alternative that literally works. And here's the monitoring on site. The opportunity for scale. Working in Semarang, in Kulna, I think there is this opportunity of replicating these type of examples that literally focusing on the hydrological cycle across the world. So last, these are Eva and Sylvain of Oost who worked on the project in Chennai. We worked on an exhibit in Hamburg on celebrating water. And there's one part that I'd like to show, and then I stop, is that it is in a museum. And the director of the museum, she asked the team, can you think about my museum as a water positive building? And Eva and Sylvain said, no, because we have to think about the system. You can't do it on the scale of the building. So what they did, they presented in the hallway of the museum on all layers of that system an approach where they say, yeah, on the scale of the building, these are the 20 things you should do. But then you also have to look at the environment, capturing the water, cleaning it on site, recharging the aquifer, cooling the building. But that's not enough. You also have to look at the whole river basin. So this is the whole Elbe crossing 3 countries, and this is Hamburg. And thinking about this whole hydrological cycle, thinking about agriculture. And they came across fascinating facts, like in the past, in this river stream, they found stones now that were put there in the past, and they were called hunger stones. And why were they called hunger stones? The moment they would appear with a drought or less water, there was the alarm bell. This was the canary in the coal mine saying, hey, there is less water coming, so it will be a dry year, so no harvest this year, hunger stone. These hunger stones, you can see them now everywhere. And people say, oh, look, this is a fact from the past, it's a hunger stone. Then not making the connection to the current, that if the hunger stone happens now, it's also not a good idea. But they see it as an artifact of something in the past. So the team went, yeah, you laugh about, but this is challenging. This is where we are. So is this enough? Understanding this complexity and embracing it at all scale and then starting to create these opportunities? No, of course. And what we do in place 1, of course, can't be easily replicated in place B. We always have to rethink what we do where. Everything is, is defined by culture, by politics, by the way we do. But it is possible. The moment you invest in the people, in the places, in these opportunity to create safe spaces, there is an opportunity, it's a necessity. And again, quoting Secretary, we have to, we have literally no time to waste. The world is falling apart. So when we organized the UN 2023 Water Conference, Secretary General said, we have to put water front and center in the multilateral agenda. It is key. It took him a while, but we came together here in New York. Here, look, your president. He, at that time, was not yet president, but senior minister, but already co-chair of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, played a critical role in the UN conference. The outcome of the conference was a negotiation, and the UN now adopted a UN-wide strategy on water, with 2 more conferences. It was the first conference since 1977, 46 years without a water conference. Now in 2026 and in 2028, there will be others. And we asked for the appointment of a water envoy at the UN. Someone who you can call, who is responsible for this water agenda. Secretary General Guterres just appointed Her Excellency Retno Marsudi. She starts November 1. Ms. Marsudi is currently the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. A highly well-respected diplomat, so well-respected across the board. So we really hope that she can be a champion. She literally said to me, I don't know nothing about water, but we will teach her. I'm pretty sure as a community of the world, she's looking for help. She's really inclusive. She's reaching out. She wants to understand and play her leadership role from the capacities that she has. So yes, we have to dare to comprehend the alternative through all these means that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ovink. That was a very fascinating and very inspiring lecture. I would now like to introduce the moderator for evening, Prof. Cecilia. Dr. Cecilia is currently Professor in Practice of Environmental Innovation at the School of Social and Environmental Sustainability in the University of Glasgow, UK, as well as an Adjunct Senior Research Fellow at IES LKY School of Public Policy. She has over 25 years of research, training, and consulting experience on water, environmental, and natural resource management in the context of development. Working at present on impacts of global challenges on water, environment, and food securities, societies, and their interlinkages. In 2024, she received an honorary doctorate of science in technology from Aalto University, Finland, for her important contributions to water and development research and education. She is the recipient of the Crystal Drop Award in 2016 and the 50th Anniversary Award in 2021 of the International Water Resources Association. She's also a member of the International Selection Committee of the Millennium Technology Prize awarded by Technology Academy Finland, the UKRI Future Leaders Fellowships Peer Review College in UK, and the OECD Initiative on Water Governance. Prof. Cecilia is the past president of the Third World Center for Water Management, Mexico, and the first and only woman president of the International Water Resource Association in its over 50 years of history. Please join me in welcoming her on stage. I would now like the audience here as well as on Zoom to raise their questions. Please note we just have 35 minutes, so please ask your questions quickly in the interest of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have another half an hour to continue with this fascinating conversation. When we work on water, we think that the world revolves about water, around water, and it's not. As important as it is going to depend on the decisions, as you have explained very, very clearly, very eloquently, on every other sector, on political decisions. And at the end, it affects people. And I like very much the title of your presentation because it includes you and it includes us. It includes all of us. This is a problem for everybody, not only for the people who are in the most disadvantaged places. No, this is a water cycle. This is the earth, and it is affecting all of us. So after such a comprehensive conversation, I heard, which you all heard, what has not been explained before, that is that there is this direct relation between climate change and the hydrological cycle. Climate change is somewhere there, far with the carbon markets, and water doesn't matter. It does. The way in which climate change is, we can see the impacts is through higher temperatures and changes in the hydrological cycle, and we don't see it. Okay, now we see it, right? That's very clear, and there will be this report that will bring, as we were discussing today, many things that are known, but many that had not been reflected on. And so now let's disseminate it. And where do we go? Where do we go now? Because as we heard, we are, you mentioned both, I would say we are concerned of seeing so many disasters all over the world that go out of our hands. But do they go out of our hands? So is it something that we can, is there anything we can do, which we can as society? So I think you have raised your hand if you would like to make the first question.
Yes,
and I want
you.
to give you.
Yeah.
So it is very nice that you spoke about your success in New Jersey. In
Take the mic.
Chennai.
No, you need a mic for the Zoom.
On Zoom.
Yeah, that's why.
Thank you. So you spoke so well about your success in Jersey City, in Chennai, Semarang. How about your design or your plan or your ideas for Singapore?
Well, I don't have a design or plan for Singapore, but I was just here with students this afternoon with Naomi. She's sitting there. We had the reimagining of the challenges that come at Singapore are, of course, massive. At the same time, Singapore is a leader in thinking through future opportunities. I think you will all have the capacity, and I think NUS, in the collaboration with government agencies and the other schools in Singapore and international partners, are super well positioned to be that safe space, to reimagine futures in the context of disappearing biodiversity, climate change impacts, water scarcity, quality, and availability. So I don't think the other thing, you have a president that understands it very well. And I can't say that for many other places in the world, including my own, where they're right now the Netherlands government doesn't really understand this well. So I think you can, the thing I would say is that knowing that so much comes together here, the only thing that you could do wrong is not capitalize on that. And I think that is a challenge. Yeah? I think too often in the world where there is the capacity, you have the capacity, an amazing academic institutional environment. Beyond NUS, there are more. A government that puts these challenges front and center. A business community that is willing and able to invest. And an international community that is willing and able to work with you. So one, not capitalizing on that now would be like massively disastrous. Second, capitalizing and seeing Singapore also as the connector in Southeast Asia is I think the second opportunity. Really saying, if we look across the board of these challenges that we face and the capacity Singapore brings to this agenda, it can literally be a convener and a connector across the many places here in Southeast Asia. So I don't think it's a matter of doing right or this is now, this is here. Capitalizing on it, I'm pretty sure that you can. Making best use of your role here in Southeast Asia in that context would be even more amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think, just 1 second, we are going to ask a question for somebody who made it in Zoom. But I also wanted to complement what you just mentioned. We all know the think ahead, think across, and think again, right? And that's something that applies very much and very well to this very, very complex situation in terms of climate change and water and livelihoods. So now we're going to, there's an answer from somebody who is it's not in Zoom exactly, but is making the question through Zoom. With experience learned from handling Sandy, how did America fare in Typhoon Milton?
Yeah, I think and that's perhaps the fascinating aspect, of course, is that the combination of President Obama entering office, understanding that climate, he brought climate front and center into his agenda, with equity paired to that. And saying that he wants a government able to deliver. So he brought these aspects of justice, climate science and understanding, and delivery mechanisms together into a national disaster response framework with this leadership on top. I think in the I don't know exactly everything about Milton's response, but Sandy was at scale massive. I'm not sure what you see happening now in the US. It's harder. Under Obama, things were divided, but things are more divided now. It's tougher to come together. We have climate denial all over the place. Not being able to be taught in schools. So it's like, I think the situation is hard to compare. At the same time, we also know that even under President Trump, more money went to climate adaptation than in the years before. Why? Because we had more disasters in the US. And this is not, something Republicans or Democrats can choose for. This is just happening. With Rebuild by Design, that is now an NGO, we did a disaster risk atlas research. It's online, it's available online for everyone, where we look back, and it turned out that close to every county, which is like the smallest governance system next to a city, every county in the US faced multiple federally declared disasters in these times. And that means that risks are felt by everyone. And the places that are in denial or not have as many or even more of these impacts. So it's against the current of climate, but these communities also get federal emergency or state emergency response aid in that context. So I don't have a good answer because I don't know exactly the response after after Milton. But I do know that it's more contested now and more challenging, but those same frameworks are still in place. But you need the people. A framework does nothing without the right leadership.
Very much.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you, Dr. Ovink, for this talk. It was really, really cool, and water is something close to my heart, so this is a treat. I was wondering, you identified disasters as one of the moments in time where we can create and build better and find opportunities. Given that there's so much path dependency in lock-in, what are the other places you've identified or moments in time where maybe perhaps we don't have to wait for a crisis to happen? And how do we create those conditions?
Yeah, I think it's in my conviction, we should not wait for those disasters, because that is actually the worst. We bring out the worst in mankind if we need a disaster to act. Second, as I said, we become numb in the context of these disasters. We actually don't take our responsibility, but I think we should. So I'm not saying we do, I'm saying we should. Disasters show that we failed. Disasters show that we have to step up our game. Is it happening? No. In the global south, nor in the global north. 3 years ago, we had massive flood in Germany. More than 200 people died. Did anything change? And I mean, that's not like the thousands in Pakistan and Libya, but for Germany, 200 people is quite a lot of people. Did anything change in their policy? No. So we have a hard time waking up to a reality and figuring out, oh yeah, that has to stop. And I'm not an elected official. I don't run a country or a city or a government, but it has to stop. We lose way too many people, way too many assets, environmental and economic in the context. And there are alternatives. We can do this. It's not only shown, I mean, across the board. I worked in Peru after the floods, in droughts, and worked in conflict regions in the Middle East and Central Asia. In every part of the world, it is possible, but it's only depending on, in that sense, it's a little bit of a, I'm a little bit sorry I have to use this word, but a leadership question and also a matter of coming together. To your point, we have those, and the second is we have those agreements. I don't need another Paris Agreement to be better at climate action. So I think this is also what I'm not saying makes me cynical, but challenges me. It took us Copenhagen as a failure and then Paris as a success to go back to the negotiation table. And I still wonder what went wrong in the multilateral process. So it took us everything to reach Paris. And the day after that agreement, the same process continued. Nobody said then, and I still wonder. I think that's going to be my question to Ban Ki-moon the next time I see him. It's like, why didn't you say, now is a different time? We have to rethink UNFCCC, how this negotiative process unfolds, because we have an agreement that we have to implement. And of course, there are many loose ends. It's fine. But we're not presenting the same process for implementation as we do for negotiation. But that's what they did. So what happened? Negotiations were front and center instead of implementation. So it's fascinating. We never do this in a program. The design phase, the research phase is different than the design phase, is different than the implementation phase, right? Otherwise, you can never get things done. And so it's interesting to think about. It's just not really an answer to your question. I wish I had the answer to your question because that would help us all. Yeah, I wish we as a global community could in that sense be more vocally unified and say it's enough. Because I think it's enough. Pakistan floods, was it a year or 2 years ago? We don't want this. Our glaciers melt at a rate unprecedented. Freshwater disappear in front of our eyes. This is not what we want. We're stuck in vested interest. We're stuck in stupidity of the past. That is not necessary. We can get stuck in a better future. It's way more fun, you know, and it is way more empowering, and there are way more opportunities. But we fear the change and let go of our vested interest and continue to stay stuck in that past and not dare to step up against those powers that be. And I think I have no answer there. I wish we could, you know, we could rally for world peace if I had that answer. But it's not there. I must say, I chaired the water conversations between the Israelis and the Palestinians for 7.5 years, until October 7th last year. 7.5 years, we had 2 Gaza wars. 7.5 years where every time we were able to bring them together. 7.5 years with ups and downs and inequality in the relationship in the context of this conflict. We're also 7.5 years of empowerment, of people that gave everything to come back to the table, even in the context of the challenges they faced from their own communities and their own constituency. That always gave me hope. It was, of course, lost last October and the year after. But I must say what we were able to accomplish was, and that you know, and we saw it in many other places. So I think there is a massive amount of opportunities we can capitalize on, and we should. Next to saying that we should call on the world, enough is enough. The other thing is, and this is what my parents are long gone, but this is what I learned from them, is that you take every opportunity, no matter how small it is, and seize it, build it up, and work hard, and work with everyone. And I think that is the other side of the story, is that, yes, it's enough. And at the same time, we can do everything we can, always. And I think there is beauty in that, because every time we work with these communities in these places, things happen. And it's not a revolution. Revolutions are tough. You know, a lot of people die with revolutions. But it's change that is cultural, that is emotional, that is done by the heart, by the mind. And I think that is gives me hope too. Yeah. So it's the smallness of that in the context of these larger issues. But I, of course, hope that on the global agenda, we wake up and grow up real fast. Yeah, real fast.
Let me make 2 comments before giving you the microphone, based on what you just said. When there is a disaster, being a natural disaster, a political disaster, or a policy disaster somewhere in the developing world, we think that is because there is no human capacity, institutional capacity, or financial capacity. When this happens in the developed world, then we realize it doesn't matter. Yeah. And that's even worse. Yeah. Because you have the institutional capacity, the know-how, but it doesn't matter. No. So you want to stay within your circle, and people, those who voted for you, and it doesn't matter. And that is even more concerning.
Yeah.
That is one. Then second, something I like very much of the report is that you talk about the global, I mean, you and the group, about the global governance. And there is the acknowledgement that this global governance, we talk, as you said, the Paris Agreement and other agreements, they are based on local governance, because we will never be able to reach them if it is not because of the mayor or the governor or the president. So we can build at every level, and we're stuck.
Yeah.
And each one of the levels we're stuck. So is it fair to say this is only because of political interest? There may be more, but political interferences, they have a lot to do.
Yeah.
Can that be more than the disasters we are going through? And I think that is for everybody to think. But if you can please pass the microphone here.
Yes, thanks. Also, a very interesting talk, very inspirational. You talk about the silos that we are in, and I know myself. I'm also in a silo. I was a civil engineer, and when I did my master's, it was we do an integrated project, and that was basically working with someone from the next building, which was the architects, basically. Yeah. So, and I think along the way, I grew also to see that it is more integral, but still, I think my silos are too close to me. So my question to you would be, if we want to make our work more impactful, which silos should we break into the first, or what should be our priority to really, scale up what we do, basically?
Yeah, it's a good question. It of course depends on which silo you find yourself. But try to find the unexpected. I think and don't give up your silo completely, because we need deep understanding. So I'm not promoting for people that know nothing but are only making connections. That's like the worst of the worst. We need our silos, but we need our connections. So a silo that's transparent and is able to reach out is amazing. Without silos, we lose. We need systems understanding, deep systems understanding of all these aspects in life. So silos are great, but by themselves, they don't create a system. Silos and connections, you can imagine this already, that it's literally in these connections. And then it's not bad that you go to your neighbors first. Don't worry, don't judge yourself. It's pretty okay to say, hey, I know you a bit, but I don't know you enough. Together, you already know a bit more, and you're able to go to other neighbors. Going to neighbors is fine. Some jump, which is nice. You go from engineering to culture or social or economics. It's interesting that with the report, I did not show that, but I think I actually can. I can't. Yeah, here. Here, look. These are all the commissioners. I gave them circles. And of course, I have to excuse myself putting a circle around President Tarma, because there is no circle. But we put together a group. And when I have to tell this story a bit. When we were thinking about this commission as the third after Stern on climate and Dasgupta on biodiversity, I have high respect for Nick Stern and Partha Dasgupta. So I got nothing against them at all. They're amazing. But I said, for this, we don't want a next Stern. I also got a list of white males that also really empowered me to say no. I said, I need a group. Because I need to find water in society. I don't need to find water in water. So I want a group. And second, I want, of course, a gender balance and an age balance and a cultural balance. So I picked 4 coaches. I first approached President, then Senior Minister Tarman. We strategized. Johan Rockström, Mariana Mazzucato, and then Dr. Ngozi came in. So we had 4 co-chairs, and then we start to imagine who do we all want. So we have a youth activist from Kenya, but we also have a former ANC activist, former president of the Club of Rome, and she's in her 80s, from South Africa. A former president of the General Assembly from Ecuador, and a minister of foreign affairs from Mexico, but also climate energy scientist from India, a president from Singapore, a scientist from China, some from all over the world. And more than half of them never worked on water, ever. They had no clue what water meant to them. Yeah, of course, they loved water because it came from the tap or from a bottle or was in their produce. And they knew a bit about the relationship between water and environment and biodiversity. But the deep understanding was not there. So the blue ones are the ones that knew a thing or two about water. The green ones were ones that really focused their work on environment. And the red ones had like an overarching approach, often more political or more societal. President of the General Assembly, a mayor, Dr. Ngozi, and of course, President Tang. So a group of thinkers and leaders in their own field from every background, every age, every culture together. And I think this is, it was fascinating to bring them together because they were like, and who are you? So I am Yvonne Aki Sawyer, mayor of Freetown. I don't know any of you. And so it's literally, and I think this is, to your point, did they become a team? No, not yet. It's hard. You not all of a sudden become a team. But the report is now done, and all of a sudden they feel more connected. It's like, so I say they're all water ambassadors. They laugh a little bit when I say that, but I believe it's true. So we planted seeds, water seeds in their hearts and in their minds. They will never be able to stop thinking without it. So something is growing. It doesn't come easy. Something is growing. And like I said with Damaris Reyes on the Lower East Side, when she said, Rebuild by Design made us sit on the same table. She said it when there was the jury meeting. I was sitting next to Secretary Donovan, the minister, the chair of the task force. He was deputy mayor on housing in New York. So they knew each other. So Sean Donovan whispered in my ear and said, that was different when I was deputy mayor. But she heard him say that. She ran to the table. I did not say it. She ran to the table, slammed her hand on it and said, I can easily sit back on the other side. So it was more like a, this is the emotion. And this is what is important. We brought them together. Now we have to keep them together and expand it. And I think, to your point, you can start anywhere. That's it. Every outreach has a level of courage, and as long as you continue doing it.
On this note, we will finish the presentation. I would like to thank personally Professor Gutenchair for organizing it and for this opportunity you have given us to all of us to reflect on the topic. And this celebration of life, I like that so much. A celebration of life that is water depends on information, on science, on hard work, on activism, on science. And I think we have to take that each one of us has a part to play on this. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ovink, and thank you, Dr. Cecilia, for moderating the session. I think we've all enjoyed a lot, and I think the questions kind of showed it for it.